Hello, all, and welcome to the Gestalt IT Rundown, your weekly look at the IT news of the week. That's why we call it Gestalt IT. I'm your host, Rich Stroffolino, and joining me from across this great land of ours, of yours, of mine, of everyone that's a U.S. American, we have, of course, Tom Hollingsworth. Tom, thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me, Rich. I am apparently enjoying the Ides of March much better than Caesar.
It's true. If we want to get into this, I know a lot about the Roman calendar, and on some months, the Ides fall on the 12th. Some of them, they fall on the 15th. Some of them, they fall all over. It's really just to commemorate the halfway point of the mark. There's the calends, which was the start of the month. It's very complicated, involves planting in the moon. I don't want to get into it. This is the Gestalt IT Rundown, where we don't talk about calendars that don't matter to anyone but Shakespeare. We're going to be going into a story that I think we've talked to death because Qualcomm and Broadcom, it's the merger we all wanted to never end, and it seemed like we were getting there. Unfortunately for Broadcom's interests, at least, President Trump had enough of it and released an order basically saying that for national security reasons, Broadcom could not acquire Qualcomm. The background to this is that the understanding was that the 5G market would have ceded control over to Chinese interests, with Broadcom not really taking as much of an interest in 5G standards as Qualcomm would, and that would imperil information infrastructure going forward. Tom, this seemed to, there was the Treasury Department had gotten involved. This seems to have kind of come out of nowhere. I could understand this being a concern, but to kill it outright seemed a little sudden to me.
Yeah, there was rumblings that Broadcom was trying to do another kind of end run around some of the CFIUS stuff. Just for those of you who don't know, CFIUS is the Committee for Investigating Foreign Investments in the U.S. CFIUS was going to oversee when Broadcom brought Brocade, and the way that they got around it is they said, "Oh, well, we'll move our headquarters to Silicon Valley." And they actually ended up incorporating in Delaware, with their headquarters being in Silicon Valley. And they stood on stage with the president and said, "Hey, we're investing in the U.S.," which was evidently good enough for Fiber Channel, but not good enough for 5G, because Broadcom even accelerated their boards or the decision to move the headquarters. They were trying to get into the U.S. 2 days before the Qualcomm board elections. And CFIUS released a statement saying that they think that this is bad for national security. And the president just said, "Enough is enough. I'm done with this." Okay, so now what? Because believe it or not, I know you're going to laugh at this with the stock market. Brocade's stock bounced and Qualcomm stock didn't, because somebody was unhappy that they weren't going to get cashed out when Brocade did their takeover. I'm sorry, not Brocade, Broadcom.
What's really interesting to me is a couple of different things. One is, the government getting involved, not just saying that, this, I can understand almost from a monopoly perspective, right? That happens all the time, right? That's the reason Sprint and T-Mobile didn't get together, right? It would create an uncompetitive landscape, monopoly, too much, or I'm sorry, AT&T, right, was going to buy T-Mobile, whatever. There was going to be too much consolidation in the telecom market. That, to some degree, I understand from competitive reasons, but this is, there's a little bit more of a 3D chess going on, right? Because it wasn't that Qualcomm was going to get out of the 5G, out of the 5G market. It was that the intention of Broadcom was not to take it quite as seriously to their core business as Qualcomm, which therefore would open the door, to that. And then some of the other stipulations that I thought were very interesting was that all of the board members that Broadcom had kind of set up to sit on Qualcomm's board can't stand for election at all, which seems to very much get involved with corporate, like the government getting involved with corporate governance. Theoretically, the reason these people were standing for there is because they had purchased major shares of Qualcomm. They have an interest in Qualcomm outside of necessarily their ties to Broadcom. It just seems very heavy-handed overall in terms of a regulation. And again, it's not like a direct thing of, they're going to immediately kill this if they buy it. I'm also surprised we didn't see more talk of Broadcom maybe throwing out, we'll spin off, certain assets and create, a jointly owned company that will be, entirely independent or something like that to try and get this going. But, maybe they announced that they're officially done with this idea, which seems weird to me. It appears to be dead for all intents and purposes, which got really weird for a second, because right before this came out, there was some talk that Intel was going to buy Broadcom, or was looking to buy Broadcom in what would have been another order of magnitude larger acquisition than this already gargantuan acquisition. So some really weird stuff going on in the wake of the death of this merger.
Yeah, and I'm going to be interested to see if Intel continues to pursue that, or if Intel turns around and tries to buy Qualcomm, which is totally a thing that could happen. Of course, we know how well Qualcomm feels about that, but I'd be interested to see, whether or not the U.S. or Chinese weigh in on Intel buying Broadcom, because that could kind of give you an indication of where they feel like their headquarters really exists versus where it's physically located.
So, yeah, where the taxes are going temporarily for 5 minutes. And I think that would cause all sorts of problem, because that would be a real consolidation of the modem market, and I think you would see a lot of U.S. companies not wanting to see that kind of consolidation if Intel were to go after Broadcom. But in more positive, but perhaps just as hardware related news, Tom, it's Pi Day. I got my Raspberry Pi. It's in a case. It's a security camera, so you can't really see the goodness of it. But it's Pi Day. It's an arbitrary day. For Europeans, it doesn't make any sense, because 14.3 doesn't really mean anything. But to celebrate, the Raspberry Pi Foundation released the Raspberry Pi 3B Plus. It had some pretty cool features: dual band 802.11ac Wi-Fi, Bluetooth 4.2 support, and Bluetooth Low Energy. Now officially supports power over Ethernet. You need to buy another little accessory for that, but it's not like a little weird hack-on thing that you have to do. Increase the processor speed by about 16%, not really a big deal. But it's, of course, the same $35 price that we've come to expect from the Raspberry Pi. Notably, the one thing, again, that is not added is any kind of real I/O. Everything is still running over a single USB 2.0 port. I put out a snarky tweet that, gigabit Ethernet over USB 2 is kind of not gigabit Ethernet in any meaningful capacity. So, Tom, I'm interested. This is a perennial hacker tool. We've seen some really interesting stuff from the kind of Kubernetes crowd building really cool clusters out of this. Does this change the game at all? I mean, I think the official PoE stuff could make this a little bit more interesting. But I mean, this is purely an enthusiast tool, right?
Right now it is. I mean, we've seen some companies that have tried to build around that. The one that immediately springs to mind is NetBees. Their company that's presented at Tech Field Day before, and they've got a wireless/network monitor that runs off of this. I'm interested to see what Stroffolino and Panos come up with. Having PoE support, having dual band Wi-Fi. Again, AC does not mean gigabit, so it's still going to be fast. It's not going to be super fast compared to like a 4 spatial stream laptop, but it's knowing the capabilities of the device that you have and being able to push it. I can remember getting one of the very first Raspberry Pis. Someone gave it to me in a contest somewhere, and I looked at it. I was like, I can't really do a whole lot with this. And now look at where we're at with a computer the size of a credit card. I mean, I could literally teach my son to program Python on a device that could be stuck to the bottom of a keyboard if I so wanted it to.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. I had totally forgotten about NetBees. And, that opens up not just the PoE, but having the dual band introduces some interesting, obviously you're not going to be sampling on the same network, but you could do some cool things in having, discrete networks, not having to operate everything over the same network. So that could be cool. Some interesting client side things as well. I want to see Alex Ellis also get his hands on these and do some weird open fast stuff with that. That would be really cool. And again, of course, it's going to be like 3 months before anyone can actually buy one of these, because they'll sell out immediately. And the Raspberry Pi Foundation, if the Raspberry Pi Zero is any indication, can be a little slow to produce more. But I thought that was cool and a fun little thing to do on Pi Day. And fun stuff.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next up, we have some major AMD Ryzen problems. A company called CTS Labs, basically dumped a whole bunch of security vulnerabilities on AMD and the public at large. They gave AMD 24 hours notice, which I've seen in security circles. Best practices kind of dictate 60 to 90 days to reply to, or to have any kind of response to these kind of security vulnerabilities. So AMD hasn't officially announced any response to these as far as I've seen to date as of we're broadcasting right now. That may change literally within a matter of minutes. But it seems like AMD kind of got left in the lurch here. Let me run down some of the major components here. There are a whole bunch. I think there were over 25 vulnerabilities, but they fall under 4 main categories. One is called Master Key, which requires a BIOS reflash that lets you execute code in their secure processor. Execute code directly. Tom, you and I were discussing this beforehand that, yeah, this does require a BIOS reflash, which basically means you own the machine at that point anyway, if you're able to rewrite such some basic functionality on a device. But this does affect Ryzen and EPYC processors, kind of both their consumer and their enterprise facing processors. And that's probably the most major in terms of the exploit you can possibly do, just be able to arbitrarily execute code.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I executed in Secure Enclave too, or their version of Secure Enclave. That's not a good thing.
Yeah, the next one up is it's called Chimera. There's a couple variants of that, and that affects the Promontory chipset. I believe I'm pronouncing it Promontory. Yes, chipset, and it's basically AMD had gotten that from a third-party manufacturer, and it's a basically an exploit that executes a backdoor from that manufacturer to give you access to, I believe, protected memory on that. And so that seems they got caught with their pants down, not realizing what exactly that chipset manufacturer was doing. The good thing I feel like about that one is they at least have a partner to go to and say, hey, fix this, like immediately. Like that to me seems, perhaps the most egg on their face, but also theoretically the easiest to fix. The other two are very similar ones called Ryzen Fall, and this affects the AMD Secure OS, which talks to their version of Secure Enclave, and this lets you access protected memory. And then the other one is EPYC specific. It's called Fallout, and it basically does the same thing via the bootloader. Again, a whole lot of vulnerabilities. I've seen press releases from CTS Labs saying that all of these exploits so far have been, they're not theoretical. They have successfully executed all of them. We just kind of are seeing the lay of the land Intel, post meltdown and Spectre. AMD's already dealing with their own Spectre fixes. They were very early to crow about how they weren't affected by some of the meltdown stuff. Tom, is this just the landscape we live in? These are extraordinarily complex processors, and people are going to find hideous security vulnerabilities?
Pretty much. They've built so much stuff into the processors now that there's no telling the avenues you can get into. Plus, with all the security stuff that they're trying to build in the back end, the secure enclaves, the secure processing unit stuff, it's just a big tempting target. I mean, I'm going to have to go all the way back to the 90s to quote one of my favorite movies, Hackers. Risk architecture is going to change everything. Well, at this point, I think we need to get back to a little more simple processing units and find ways to kind of secure what we're working on, because if we don't, we're going to find ourselves constantly under attack by, these security researchers in some cases, and in some cases not security researchers, doing things they're not supposed to be doing. Just, either they're trying to collect a bug bounty or they're trying to embarrass somebody.
Yeah, I have seen that. It's interesting. We hear a lot about scale out in terms of storage and in terms of like raw compute capacity, maybe. But the idea of using scale as a security measure of being able to distribute more things over simpler processors as a theoretical way of securing these kind of things, where you can own the data path's the wrong word, but you can own kind of the root to the processor a little bit more and not have. Like you said, these incredibly complex processors, but I feel like that's a generational shift. I mean, that's not something that we can turn to, even over the course of years. That's a fundamental rethinking of computing, which doesn't do us a lot of good here. I do have to question the politics of this. If how CTS is acting, obviously they want to make a big name for themselves in the press, which they have succeeded. We're talking about it, so they've succeeded in doing. If they had given AMD a lot of time, I'm not sure if they had some impression from AMD that they weren't going to act swiftly on this, and this is why they kind of forced their hand by going public so early with these. But that does make me question their motivations as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and we're going to finish up with something a little interesting. Tom, have you ever wondered if your calendar application could be improved by a little crypto mining?
All the time.
I know. It's the constant thing I'm looking at when I'm looking. I just use the Apple Calendar. But Calendar 2, which is a fairly popular calendaring app, recently introduced new features that let you get their premium features, not by paying a monthly fee or a one-time unlock license or something like that. Instead, opting into crypto mining. And it seems like a number of consumers were taking them up on this. They generated $2,000 over 3 days by using this, which if you look at the $700,000 they've made over the past 7 years is triple their average daily revenue from this model. However, Apple put the they've already removed it because they were getting some bad feedback from users, and then Apple came in and kind of put the kibosh on it, not saying that it's illegal to do crypto mining, but that it violates their terms in basically saying don't burn up my CPU with your app. And so they were saying from power management perspective, this wasn't feasible. But Tom, I'm curious what you think. Crypto mining in your calendar, is this just someone reaching for a fad? Or, I mean, they made legit money and more money per day than they had over the past 7 years.
We've already seen this with using crypto mining to replace web ads. It's a hot new craze. Everybody wants to go mine for Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever the next Dogecoin is going to be. It's in theory, it works out. And I mean, this was not some kind of shady, we're going to sneak this in thing. I saw the screenshot from Calendar 2, and it was very blatant. It said, unlock all of our features for free by agreeing to be a crypto miner. Now, what happened is that the library that they borrowed, and I forget the name of the company who uses it, I think it was like DigiKey or something, they didn't implement it properly. And so what was happening was, the calendar was spiking CPUs to like 85, 90% of their utilization. Which, if anybody who has a Mac out there knows, that basically turns your fans on. That's when you know you've hit max processor utilization. And so that people were saying, our Mac is sluggish. We can't use it like we used to. What's going on? That's when they started doing the investigation. But realistically speaking, $18 to unlock the calendar, oh, that's too much. Free if I agree to let you do crypto mining for a little bit? Okay, fine. So maybe the solution to this problem is not let me do crypto mining on your calendar forever. Maybe it's let me do crypto mining for a week. Let me do crypto mining for a month. Maybe
or hit a specific hash number, like so many hashes.
And that will give them a guaranteed revenue stream. The problem is, you're right, they made $2,000 in 3 days. How much would they have made if they'd have gone for 30? Extrapolate that out. They would have made a lot more than it cost to develop the program, and they wouldn't have been adding new features to it. This is the new subscription model. Just let us mine Bitcoins in your browser or your processor for a while, and we'll rake in the cash until the market crashes, and we'll just be rich.
It does seem that. But on the other hand, one of the problem that we have with popular applications that maybe don't get a ton of support is, there isn't a lot of financial motivation for innovation of new features. Whereas if you have a steady revenue stream, theoretically, you can be much more aggressive with, again, how many new features are you adding to a calendar app? That's a whole other thing. But there has to be a way to make this work that is great that can have a positive user experience, that won't kill your battery, that won't cause your fan to be buzzing all the time. Maybe it's, it only starts mining when you're inactive for 5 minutes and it has a 5-minute timeout. CoinHive had this interesting model, and to go back to them, I'm always curious. They have such audacity with the idea of replacing web ads with crypto mining. But one of the things that they did was, instead of a reCAPTCHA, it was basically a crypto mining CAPTCHA, where you click a box, it mines to a certain hash rate. Usually it's like 512 hashes or something very small, but it's enough to put off any bot that's going to be trying to do your form, and two, it does over the long term provide fractions of a penny of revenue. Maybe there's something along those lines where, each time you add a calendar appointment, it does some sort of mining, or, like you said, when you open the app or when you close the app, or something along those lines. But yeah, just having it on all the time and being poorly implemented, not good on Calendar 2's part. All right, well, that just about does it for the Gestalt IT Rundown for this week. Tom, you blew up my phone as soon as that Qualcomm-Broadcom thing came through, and we'll miss it. We'll have to send it off. We'll toast to it tonight, I think. We hardly knew ye, giant chip conglomerate that would have taken over everything. 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time with your IT news of the week. Until then, you can find us at gestaltit.com. You can find me at Mr. Anthony. Tom, where else can people find you on the cyberspace?
They can always check me out on Twitter as @networkingnerd, blog is networkingnerd.net, and also at gestaltit.com.
Oh, Tom, you froze up there just for a second. That's okay. You can find it.com, which is really cool. And we'll have more stuff there. Subscribe also to the Gestalt IT YouTube channel. I think that's enough plugging that we've done so far. So until the next time we meet, day.